The Arizona Cardinals coverage against opposing tight ends has been so loose this season, it's been like throwing a hot dog down a hallway, and things could get even worse this week. Let's talk about tight ends that we're going to start and sit in week 4. Hey Headliner Nation, what's going on? Kyle coming to you from the Draft.com studios, talking about tight ends that we're going to start or sit here in week 4. And as we do before every episode to start and sit, we're being transparent, talking about our results from last week. I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. Let's talk about the bad news here first. Now, the bad news is 65% on my tight end calls for last week on hits and misses. Now, that's not bad. We try to be right around that 70% mark, and we're a little bit tougher on ourselves than most other outlets for fantasy football. The cutoff for any type of skill position player is 10 plus points, and there are only 8 tight ends that are currently scoring at least 10 plus points a game in fantasy football. So it has been tough calling tight ends this year, but I also want to tell you the good news now. The good news is, as you know, we've talked about it a little bit before, I'm a certified ranker over at Fantasy Pros, and right now on the season, I am ranked 4th overall out of about 150 total certified rankers on Fantasy Pros. 50th overall for every position, 4th overall for tight ends. I was 18th overall last week for all positions. So a good week last week in terms of actually ranking the tight end. So even though we were at that 65%, the actual rankings episodes that we did, I was pretty spot on and felt really good about it. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Let's discuss week 4 and what tight ends we're going to start and sit this week. All right, the first matchup, Thursday Night Football this week. The Eagles are heading to Green Bay. And I do have Zach Ertz listed as a start this week, but I think we should probably temper expectations a little bit. Now, he is a must start. And last week, I got a lot of hate for listing him as a start, but ranking him very low. I had him ranked at 7th overall last week. And I said it was because I thought the Detroit Lions were going to try and take him away from the game plan. I wonder if we could see a lot against the Green Bay defense that, really, in all honesty, is better than the Detroit Lions. They have only given up 71 yards to opposing tight ends. That's the second least in the league right now. And Green Bay is also only giving up 5.03 points per game to opposing tight ends, third fewest. So second fewest yards in the league to opposing tight ends, third fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. So on a Thursday night game, which statistically don't turn out to be as well or as good as for offenses as other games, we could see some of the same thing with Ertz this week. Obviously could get peppered with a lot of targets, but that upside just isn't there for me. If you own him, you have to start him. Just temper your expectations. As far as Jimmy Graham goes, he has only had 2 targets, and he's had no receptions since he had his big week 1 game on Thursday Night Football to open up the season against the Chicago Bears. So he hasn't really done anything since then. I'm going to go ahead and list him as a sit again this week until I see him get back on track. And with Dallas Goedert, he hasn't really done anything this year. He has less than 3 fantasy points so far this season. He had a wide open touchdown that was dropped last week. A lot of us thought that he was going to be implemented into the system even more this year, and it just hasn't happened yet. So unless we start to see some things develop with Goddard, we're going to go ahead and continue to bench him moving forward. When Tennessee heads to Atlanta to face the Falcons this week, I've got both Hooper and Walker as starts this week. Right now, Austin Hooper is the tight end 6, averaging 13.1 points per game. And then Walker is the tight end 8, averaging 11.9 points per game. And as I mentioned in the opening, there are only 8 tight ends that are averaging more than 10 points per game right now. These are 2 of them. Both of these teams are giving up just over 12 points per game to opposing tight ends as well. These guys are number one, not the number one targets on their team, but number one type targets on their team. They're looked at very often by their quarterbacks right now. Maybe we see Hooper start to come back to earth a little bit if Calvin Ridley gets going a little bit more. But until then, you're going to continue to play them. Top 10 tight ends, you're not going to sit them, especially guys that are averaging over 10 points per game. This is liable to be a fun one in Buffalo this week, and not necessarily because of the offenses, but I think defenses are going to reign supreme in Buffalo this week, and we could see a lot of issues trying to get the ball into the end zone. Right now, Dawson Knox obviously had a real good game last week, but keep in mind, he only had 2 receptions and 19 yards prior to week 3. So was that his coming out party, or is he going to still continue to put up those less than stellar games? I got to see more, especially against a New England defense that has played very well against tight ends. And Matt LaCosse and Izzo, both of those guys, they've been non-factors so far. I'm not interested in starting either of those guys, and both of them are on basically 100% of waiver wires right now. But both of these defenses are giving up less than 7 points per game to opposing tight ends right now. So when you've got a guy like Dawson Knox that only has one really good game this year, actually only one good game or decent game this year, and 2 other guys that really aren't even a part of the game plan, when you've got that in a situation where these defenses don't allow a lot of points to opposing tight ends, you just go ahead and sit them and play it safe. Travis Kelce, well, he's a start anytime you own him. And TJ Hawkinson hasn't really done anything since week 1, but I'm going to go ahead and move him back to the start category this week. Hawkinson, since his big week 1, when he had over 130 receiving yards, he's only had 2 receptions for 8 yards. He's been basically irrelevant in weeks 2 and 3. He's going to be a roller coaster all season long, and this is something that I warned fantasy owners about over the offseason. Yes, he could have some big games here or there, but Marvin Jones, Kenny Galladay, Kerryon Johnson can catch the ball out of the backfield. It might be one of those situations where, yeah, he does pop off and have a big game. Other times, he might not. With that being said, Kansas City is giving up 16.4 points per game to opposing tight ends, the 5th most in fantasy football right now. TJ Hawkinson took advantage of an Arizona Cardinals defense that's even worse in week 1. Can he do some of the same against Kansas City this week in a positive game script for him where they're going to be coming from behind quite often? Yes, it's 100% possible, so go ahead and start him again this week. And the one thing that I just want to say about Travis Kelce, again, he's a must start. If you own him, he is in your lineup. But after facing Zach Ertz last week, Detroit is still averaging 5.43 points per game to opposing tight ends right now. That's 4th best in the National Football League. Detroit doubled Zach Ertz basically on every single play last week. If you were to go back and watch the game film, Zach Ertz has 2 guys on him more than 95% of the time. They are all over him. You're not going to be able to do the same thing to Travis Kelce because of the weapons there at wide receiver. However, Matt Patricia could say, you know what, we're going to take Travis Kelce out of this and we're going to make them beat us with the deep ball and see what happens. This isn't going to be a great game for Detroit anyway. It's going to be very ugly on the defensive side of the ball. But still, just a caution with Travis Kelce. It could be a week where, again, some of his upside is limited by a Detroit offense that's played pretty good against opposing tight ends so far. Oakland at Indianapolis this week. Darren Waller, always a start. Our guy, balls to the Waller. Definitely like him this week against the Indianapolis Colts. And I really wanted to put Eric Ebron in the start column this week, but I just couldn't do it. Moving back to Darren Waller, he has 12 more targets than Tyrell Williams, who is second on the team in targets. Right now, Darren Waller has 29 targets on the season, most on his team. And Indianapolis is giving up 16.03 points per game to opposing tight ends. 6th most right now in National Football League. Now, Ebron has been better over the last couple of weeks. Okay, bad week 1. Seems to be picking up a little bit, but he still needs to find the end zone to be fantasy relevant. And right now, the Oakland Raiders have only allowed 3 targets to opposing tight ends in the red zone this season. They could do a lot of the same thing against the Indianapolis Colts this week and make them beat them other ways. Again, Eric Ebron, he's been getting a little bit better, but he has to score to be a guy that you can put in your lineup consistently. Jack Doyle, we just haven't seen enough from him yet. Yes, he was a favorite of Jacoby Brissett a couple of years ago. It just hasn't came to fruition yet this year. We'll continue to monitor it, but Jack Mother and Doyle is going to be a sit for the time being. Well, the reason we're going to start Virgil Green this week, if healthy, again, note that there, if he's healthy, he was a little bit banged up after last week, but if he's healthy, we're going to start him this week against the Miami Dolphins because, well, you start everybody against the Miami Dolphins. But with that being said, maybe Mike Gesicki is a guy that is catching you off guard. Now, I didn't have him as a start last week in week 3, but I did have him as a start in week 2. This is another matchup that could bode well for Mike Gesicki this week. Now, to be fair, the Dolphins are giving up 17.5 points per game to opposing tight end, which is tied for third most. The team they're tied with? The Los Angeles Chargers. And that's why Gesicki could be a nice streaming option for you this week. Again, if you've got a tight end that maybe just doesn't have a great matchup this week, or you've been streaming them so far to start the season, Gesicki could be a guy that you could stick in your lineup and at least get 10 points from this week. Evan Ingram was my tight end 3 to start the season, and even that felt a little ambitious for me. But so far, he has returned that value. As of right now, he is the tight end 1 in fantasy football. So, of course, we're going to be starting him every single week. Right now, he's averaging 17.1 points per game. That is 2 more points per game than the tight end 2, which is Mark Andrews. So he is above and beyond the tight end 1. Right now, Washington's giving up 12.47 points per game to opposing tight ends. So expect another successful week from Evan Ingram. Now, with that being said, the New York Giants defense is bad, but Vernon Davis just hasn't done enough for me yet. Yeah, he had a touchdown in week 1. He had a really nice catch in week 1. He's just not getting nearly enough volume. And the defense, again, is not great. Now, because of that, we could see some big plays from the wide receivers for Washington this week. We saw Mike Evans have a huge week against the Giants last week. Now, our boy Terry McLaurin, he's probably not going to have a week like that. I do like him this week, but I think we're going to see more of the wide receivers than we do the tight ends. And that's why Vernon Davis is a guy that we're going to pass on in week 4. All right, so maybe you're a little bummed out from Mark Andrews last week. We had high expectations going into that game against Kansas City, but don't fear, okay? Mark Andrews isn't going anywhere. The Browns are giving up under 10 points per game to opposing tight ends right now. So maybe we should temper our expectations just a little bit this week. But keep in mind, weeks 1 and 2, Andrews had 16 catches on 17 targets, 220 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So even though he didn't have a great week last week, he's already shown what kind of an option he is for Lamar Jackson. So we're not going to be sitting him anytime soon. He's still the tight end 2 right now in fantasy football. Now, moving over to the Cleveland Browns, what are we going to do with that situation after David Njoku went down? Last week, we saw Damian Ratley and Ricky Seals-Jones both see time out there. Both of them saw several targets. However, Baltimore is only giving up 8.93 points per game to opposing tight ends, 10th fewest in the National Football League right now. Just not nearly enough upside, especially with these guys splitting touches, splitting targets. If it was just one of them, maybe we would think about it a little bit more, but these are a locked, solid no for me this week. Cleveland's not going to use them nearly enough. All right, so maybe we have some surprises in this game, Carolina at Houston. And hear me out before you judge me too much on why I'm sitting all the tight ends in this matchup. Greg Olsen is the tight end 4 right now, and he was ranked very high for me last week. A great game for him, again, against an Arizona Cardinals defense that can't stop any tight end. He is coming off the big game. However, the Texans are only giving up 6.67 points per game to opposing tight ends right now. However, they are giving up 46 points per game to opposing wide receivers. That is 5th most in the National Football League. So, Greg Olsen this week might be taken out of the game plan because the upside for the wide receivers are going to be so huge. DJ Moore could have a big week. Curtis Samuel could have a big week. And obviously you still have Christian McCaffrey, who's going to do a lot on the ground and through the air. So I'm going to temper expectations on Greg Olsen this week. He would need to find the end zone for me for him to be a start. And again, a start is a tight end that scores at least 10 points in any given week. So does Greg Olsen get to 10 points this week? I think he needs a touchdown to do it. Now, going to Atkins and Fells. Both of those guys were listed as sits for me last week. Lo and behold, 3 touchdowns between the 2 of them. However, the Panthers are only giving up 6.20 points per game to opposing tight ends right now, so it's really tough to play against them. Last week was kind of an anomaly, I think. I don't think these guys are going to be scoring touchdowns very often. They were able to last week. They're not steady enough to have in your lineup. This week in this game, I'm going to go ahead and sit everybody. If you have Greg Olsen and you don't have a much better option to stream, then you'll put him in your lineup. But again, we're going to temper expectations because getting to 10 points per game probably is going to have to include a touchdown. So several weeks ago, if you would have said, Kyle, look ahead to week 4 and tell us who would you start and sit in the matchup of the Tampa Bay Bucks at the Los Angeles Rams, These two names would have been flipped 100%, but unfortunately this week, we're going to go back to sitting O.J. Howard, and Gerald Everett could be a sneaky play for us this week. Now, Howard finally showed some life last week. Okay, he showed a lot better, made a couple of really good catches. Maybe he's starting to come around. But this is going to be a tough week. This Los Angeles Rams defense is no joke. They are all over the place. They get into the backfield. They get after the quarterback. They shut down a lot of the facets of the game. It could be a tough week for O.J. Howard against this defense. I'm going to go ahead and sit him. And again, try to stream somebody if he was my tight end one this week, because there's not nearly enough upside for me. Now, for Gerald Everett. Everett could be a high upside play this week if Tyler Higbee ends up being out again. Now, he didn't do much last week against the Cleveland Browns. However, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 18.33 points to opposing tight ends this year. That is the second most in the National Football League. So, tons of upside there, tons of potential for him to find the end zone. If Higbee is not available and out this week, then he is going to be the main guy. I definitely like him as a sneaky play. He could be a guy that you 100% could stream in place of somebody else this week. Other than this one mention of Charles Clay in the sit column, we're not going to talk about him in this matchup. The only person that we're going to talk about is Will Dissly. I gave you these numbers in the waiver wire show, but if you missed them for some reason, let me give them to you again. These are tight ends facing the Arizona Cardinals this year. TJ Hawkinson in week 1, 6 receptions, 131 receiving yards, 1 touchdown. Week 2, Mark Andrews, 8 receptions, 112 yards, 1 touchdown. In week 3, Greg Olsen, 6 receptions, 75 yards, 2 touchdowns. Will Dissly has 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games combined. He is a guy that you put in your lineup no matter what. If you own Will Dissly and you own another tight end option, then you flex Will Dissly this week. He needs to be in your lineup if you own him. And if he's still on your waiver wire for some reason, then you stop this episode, hit pause, open up a new tab, go to your league, pick up Will Dissly, put him in your lineup, come back to the video, and hit play again. Because he is in for a huge week this week. And quite honestly, Will Dissly, when my rankings come out on Saturday more than likely, you're going to be looking at my tight end one for the week. Trey Burton was a surprise start for me last week, and I really wanted to put him in the start column again this week, and I just couldn't. This Kyle Rudolph and Trey Burton are getting favorable matchups this week. The Vikings and the Bears both are basically middle of the pack in terms of stopping opposing tight ends. Now, the one thing I will say about the Bears is Jimmy Graham had a pretty good game against them in week 1, and since then they've really shut down opposing tight ends. So they've gotten better each week so far. Kyle Rudolph, because of the amount of volume in the passing game, he's a non-factor at this point. We're not interested in him or Irv Smith Jr., although Irv Smith Jr. has shown up a little bit this year. We're not interested in starting either of these guys. Trey Burton, however, I really thought about putting him in there. He just didn't get enough looks last week and a really, really favorable matchup for him. So again, it's going to have to be a really good matchup each week for me to put him in the lineup. This week he's going to be a sit, but honestly, if he were to hit for some reason and find the end zone, it wouldn't surprise me either. Just not enough for me to gamble on it and put him in my lineup this week. Another matchup that could be a little bit more on the favorable side for these tight ends, but again, not nearly enough volume for either of these guys to find your lineup. Fant is a guy that I have had as a start a couple of times this year, just hasn't done anything as of yet, which it's to be expected. We know with rookie tight ends, they can take a little bit of time to develop, and even in year 1, they don't always tend to return that value. Both of these guys are probably on your waiver wire. Go ahead and leave them there this week. See what happens in the following weeks. There just hasn't been enough volume to consider playing either of these guys so far. The Dallas Cowboys at New Orleans Saints. It would have been nice to see Dak and Breeze going at each other, but unfortunately we are going to be getting another week of Teddy Bridgewater, who didn't play too bad last week. And honestly, Jared Cook was a sit for me basically all week long through all of my research. And right before I started recording, I actually moved him back to start. I'm going to give him one more shot this week. Now, here's the thing with Jason Witten. The reason that he is a start for me is because so far he's been a trusted target for Dak Prescott. But Michael Gallup is out, and Amari Cooper had a precautionary MRI on his foot this week. So, not saying he's going to be out. Cooper more than likely will play again. Everything we've heard, it was just precautionary. Nothing that they think is actually a threat to him playing. But if there is even a little bit of a lingering issue, Witten could be a big target for Dak Prescott this week. I'm okay to move forward with that start. Now, Blake Jarwin saw a little bit more volume than Witten to begin the season, disappeared last week. He's not really a start for me because Witten is really that red zone threat right now for the Dallas Cowboys at the tight end position. Now with Jared Cook. Dallas is allowing 15.07 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends right now. So another favorable matchup. He didn't return that in a favorable matchup, I thought, last week. I honestly thought that he was going to be looked at a little bit more by Teddy Bridgewater. I'm going to give him one more chance. I'm going to give Jared Cook one more chance. I want to see what he does this week. Another favorable matchup. They are at home. And Teddy Bridgewater last week barely threw the ball 5 yards past the line of scrimmage at any point in time. So there is a chance to see Jared Cook make a little bit of an impact this week. This is going to be my last chance for him, though. If he doesn't hit this week, then I will be done with Jared Cook moving forward, like a lot of you should. But let's give him one more shot and see what happens. It is a favorable matchup. There is some upside there. It is at home. Let's keep our fingers crossed. It hasn't been great so far. All right, if you get to Monday Night Football this week and you're hoping for a tight end to help you out, then you just didn't do it right this week. Tyler Eifert and Nick Vannett, both of these guys are going to be sits for me. Eifert just hasn't been nearly consistent enough for me this year. Yes, he has been able to find the end zone. It's just not enough for me to put him in my lineup on a consistent basis. Although this could be a very good game for Andy Dalton, I'm looking more towards the wide receivers to make an impact. I think Eifert has a chance to find the end zone. And honestly, come next week, if I show him as being a miss because he did end up being a start getting 10 points per game, it's because he was able to find the end zone at some point in time. Now with Vannett, not going to go with him. Just traded for. I don't have Vance McDonald listed because as of right now, even though we haven't heard a lot about Vance McDonald, it doesn't appear like he's going to be set to play anytime soon. We'll continue to monitor it. Hopefully he comes back because he's a guy that I really, really liked this year. We'll see what happens. But for now, a new guy in a trade here, middle of the week. Not nearly enough time, even though he gets the extra day and then goes to Monday Night Football. Not nearly enough time for him to get familiarized with the system. You might see him out there. I just don't see anything happening with it. He's not a guy that we're going to start in week 4. There you have it, week 4, tight ends, start and sit. We've been doing good with tight ends so far this season, people. Keep holding on there. We've had a little bit of a roller coaster ride with some guys we thought were gonna be good. Some guys that started out good haven't done enough since. It's been a little bit weird for really everybody this fantasy season so far. So I have high hopes for week 4, though we have some really good matchups. We have some great streaming options. We have guys with high upside. So more than enough to go around this week. As always, ladies and gentlemen, if you're not a part of Headliner Nation already, hit that subscribe button. Closing in on 70,000. Maybe even by the time you watch this, we'll have passed 70,000 subscribers. Thank you so much for your continued support. Hit the like button on this video as well if you appreciated the content. And make sure you hit the notification symbol as well. Every time that we go live or we drop a video, you're going to be notified of it so you can watch right away. And as always, if you have any questions, leave some comments below. We'll get to as many as we possibly can. Jake and I have been answering a lot. We've got a couple of writers who continue to answer as well. But Headliner Nation, help each other out as well. If you see some comments and you have some good responses for them, go ahead and let them know. Help them out as well. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of the Fantasy Headliners. I'll see you on the next one. Have a good one, everybody.